20 slides है, तो 10 मिनट लगेगा। Jayom Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Sutara Satashi Shimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we'll be continuing the reading of the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita Volume 1 by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. But fortunately, an article was written in the Back to Godhead magazine in 2012 that covers the chapter and the parts in the chapter that we'll be reading today. So because it's difficult for the cameraman to switch back and forth between the slides and the reading, I'm going to quickly show the slideshow first, and then later on when we go on with the reading and the notes, we can remember these slides. All right. Thank you very much. So this is a beautiful picture of Shri Shri Radha Ballabh at the Chippiwara temple where Srila Prabhupada resided from around 1962 up until 1965 when he left for America. This is when Srila Prabhupada resided there. There was a young boy living there, and he and his mother used to serve Srila Prabhupada. He was 14 years old at the time. His name is Shrikant Vedi. We'll hear about him. This is Srila Prabhupada sitting out on his veranda there, very serious. He has a mission to complete. This is the room where Srila Prabhupada stayed. You see the pyramid where Sri Radha Ballabh are beneath the room. This is Sri Krishna Pandit, who assisted Srila Prabhupada and gave Prabhupada the room where he was able to stay. This is the narrow lane. You can see now there's an ISKCON sign there. In 2019, after 37 years of negotiating, with the help of our Golokanandan Swami and a devotee named Radha Kinkari, disciples of Gopal Krishna Maharaj, and then Neil Kant, who is the manager of the Chippiwara temple. The temple was put in the name of ISKCON, and now it's an official ISKCON temple. These two little girls They were 6 years old about when Prabhupada lived there. That's Seema and Savita. They used to live next door, and they would bring Prabhupada his milk every day and also tease Prabhupada. Prabhupada was always using a typewriter, so they would run in and steal his carbon paper. And he wouldn't get angry at them. He would just take another carbon paper, take that one back, and give them another one. Prabhupada was very affectionate to all the children in the neighborhood. He gave them all nicknames. And this little black door in the back, see, there's the temple, and then there was a house next to it. And there used to be a little passageway that even the adults couldn't get through. So these two little girls would go through the passageway, and their father, he worked for the dairy scheme. So he would give Prabhupada a bottle of milk every day, and the two girls would deliver it to Prabhupada through this little doorway. This is the daughter-in-law of Sri Krishna Pandit and her husband, I'm assuming, because the pictures didn't have any captions underneath, but where the pictures are in the article, so they were very attached to Srila Prabhupada, to serving him. And then the two little girls also. This is where Prabhupada used to get, and also Srikant Vedi, he would go sometimes with Prabhupada and sometimes alone. He would get his coal and kerosene from here. And this is now the famous Jalebi Wala, but even when I went there in 1974, it used to just be the big karai out on the road and people standing in line. The jalebis were so famous because they were cooked in ghee. So they were very nice. So Prabhupada also would sometimes get jalebis, not in this fancy shop, but just on the road when it used to be there. So the devotees always make sure, that's part of the, you have to go get your jalebis when you first come to Delhi. The Prabhupada used to get them there. And this is where Prabhupada he got his typewriter. He had a little, very small, portable Remington typewriter. And this is where he would get his ribbons and his carbon paper. This is a Kirana Dukan where Prabhupada used to get his supplies for cooking. Still there. This, I assume, you see, we've heard about Radha Press, that Prabhupada had a friend here in Krishna Chandra Sharma. He lived here in Vrindavan, and his son lived in Gandhinagar in Delhi, which is on the other side of the Jamuna. And he had a press named Radha Press. And Prabhupada used to walk from Old Delhi, Chandi Chowk, across the old bridge, all the way to Gandhinagar to meet not this gentleman, the son of his friend here, Hitcharan Sharma, who we heard about. It was he who introduced him to Mr. Dalmia and also for Hanuman Prasad Podar. But the Radha Press only had 10-point little, because in those days you had to put every single letter. It had to be lined up. No offset printing in those days. It had to be typeset, every letter. So he only had 10-point. So just near where Prabhupada was staying was another printer, OK Printer. So I believe that this is the owner of the OK Printer. This is road, we've all seen Delhi, we know. But for Back to Godhead magazine, they wanted to show the way things are carried on rickshaws and things like that, because rickshaws don't exist in America. This is the Radha Press where Prabhupada would walk to. This is, I believe, the son of Hitcharan, who now runs the press. So he had letters from Srila Prabhupada. He had some of the original proofs, because Prabhupada had started the printing then there. but then he decided to switch over to OK printer. This is the way we used to print things. This is the typeset printer. Fortunately, they had electricity, otherwise they used to do it by hand. And at first, this is how Prabhupada did his printing. This is the Srimad Bhagavatam in its complete form, when Prabhupada finally had his 3 volumes printed. And it says here that it's printed at OK Press in Churiwalan. Churiwalan is just not far from Jama Masjid and from Chippiwada where Prabhupada was, so it wasn't so difficult because Prabhupada would have to, that whole area, Nai Sadak, Chowri Bazaar, Chippiwada, it's all a printing and paper area where you, even to this day, we would buy our envelopes, everything there. It's the place for hundreds of years where you get your paper. So Prabhupada would have to go buy his paper, and Shrikant Vedi, he would carry the paper, and they would walk over 1 hour to get the paper and then bring it to the press. Shrikant said that it cost 1 paisa to go there, but they didn't have any money, so they would walk there for more than an hour. Okay, so this is, I think that's the last one. Yes, you can, this is finished now. So that's just to let you know that what happened was, when the temple was inaugurated in 2011 or sometime around then, not too long ago, finally it was put in the name of ISKCON. Now, just before Prabhupada left for America, he wrote to Krishna Pandit and told him, I want to make a contract. I would like to get the temple purchased. Of course, Prabhupada had no money then, but it took all those years for it to finally be fructified. And there was like 30 Prabhupada disciples came, and hundreds of devotees came from all around Delhi and India. They had the inauguration, and at that time, Brahmananda, who was our resident here for many years, he was hoping that a devotee would write an article and interview the devotees and the other residents of Chippiwada and get more information, because there's some information here, but one devotee, her name was Hladini Devi Dasi. I don't know whose disciple she is, because the original Hladini Devi Dasi, she was killed while preaching in Africa, and she was killed in 1990. So because this article was written and published in Back to Godhead magazine in 2012, it doesn't sound like it would have been her. So another Hladini Devi Dasi, we're very grateful to her. She went there, she did all of the research, and that's where these photos have come from, and all of the history that we'll be reading in addition to what Satsrup Maharaj has put in his book. So now we will start. Is the camera set up now for the... Okay. We're on the 10th chapter, this momentous hour of need. Krishna Pandit, dressed in a black, lightweight cotton coat, the kind made internationally recognizable by Pandit Nehru, there he is. Yes. And he had a Nehru hat also. He spoke good English and was garrulous. So garrulous means he liked to talk a lot, which is nice when you're interviewing someone. He was well known and respected within the neighborhood. He saw Bhaktivedanta Swami as God sent, a sadhu for him to take care of, and thus prove once again the piety of Hindu culture. He found his new guest likable, a simple, gentle, gracious, and accomplished Vaishnava scholar. So when Hladini interviewed Shrikant Vedi, he described how this temple was built, who built it, and how Prabhupada came to stay there. His grandmother, her name was Subhadra Vedi. She was a medical doctor. This is in the late 1800s. Medical doctor and a freedom fighter, and she was also a guru. And she had many disciples. And she asked her disciples to build a temple. So one of her disciples purchased the property where the Sri Sri Radha Vallabha temple is, and gradually they built that temple. And the deities were carved. The black marble deity is made of kasoti stone, which is the stone that's used for when you have to test gold. It's a very special marble. And the deity of Radharani is made of pure white marble. And she used to hold Gita classes there every night. And her disciples would come. And then when she became too old, her granddaughter, who is the mother of Shrikant Vedi, she and her two children, Shrikant and the little daughter, Alka, who used to be called, Prabhupada gave her the nickname Baby. And Shrikant's nickname was Babu, because he did all the work, Babuji. He used to run all the errands for Prabhupada. Hladini said that anytime he talked about Prabhupada, he would start to cry because they had a very loving relationship. Prabhupada treated all the children just like his own children there. He gave them all names, and he used to cook. He would cook khichdi and serve out khichdi. And just as he was doing in Vrindavan, very affectionate to the children. Krishna Pandit said he understood the importance of Bhaktivedanta Swami's Sanatan Dharma mission and his need for a Delhi office. He vowed to supply his guests with whatever he required. Now, Krishna Pandit was one of the 7 trustees of the Navo Prain Sabha who looked after the temple. And that was why he was able to give this room to Srila Prabhupada on rent. Prabhupada also knew Krishna Pandit's father. And before the room was given to him, when he would come and go from Vrindavan, he would stay there occasionally. But with the help of Hit Sharan, now it became his permanent residence in Delhi, so he could get his Srimad Bhagavatam printed. Because before, Prabhupada was just coming and going for his Back to Godhead magazine. But now that he had to write and print, and Prabhupada, usually when you write a book, you have your rough notes, and then you make it final. Someone will type it for you. But Prabhupada didn't write Srimad Bhagavatam that way. He directly typed onto his typewriter, onto the paper, and those papers were taken to the printer. There were no rough notes. And Prabhupada just typed with 2 fingers. And Shrikant, he was a typist. He knew how to type, with both hands. But he would make mistakes because Shrikant explained that in old Delhi, the people were mostly businessmen, and practically no one knew English. So Prabhupada, he spoke polished, perfect English, and the people in the neighborhood weren't interested in his books. But Krishna Pandit, he could understand the importance of Prabhupada's books, and that was why he vowed to supply his guests with whatever he required. Although Bhaktivedanta Swami was reluctant to ask for anything for himself, Krishna Pandit brought in a sitting mat and a low table placing them before the pyramid. And he also brought a mattress. He showed Bhaktivedanta Swami how to operate the room's single light, a bulb and metal shade that hung from a cord and could be raised or lowered by hand. So Shrikant remembers when Prabhupada first arrived at his room. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and his mother had given him the key to the room. So Prabhupada knocked on the door of the temple, and Shrikant came down in his pajamas and gave Prabhupada the key. And Prabhupada had with him a little stove, and he had his cooker, and he had one aluminum plate, and he had some books. Now, Subhadra Vedi, who was the grandmother, the guru, she had vacated the room. She had stayed in that room originally. That room was made for her to stay. So when she went back to Godhead, she had all of her books in that room. So Shrikant said that Prabhupada used to refer to her books. There were books in Hindi, English, and Sanskrit. So those books were still in the room. He brought a picture, this is Krishna Pandit, brought a picture of Radha and Krishna that had been given to his guru by the Maharaj of Jaipur, and set it within a niche in the wall, relishing that Bhaktivedanta Swami could gaze upon it with the eyes of a true devotee. Bhaktivedanta Swami had wanted to secure a place for writing books before going to the West, and Lord Krishna had provided it. Shrikant explained Prabhupada's daily schedule. He would rise every day at 3 a.m., and he never took a hot water bath. He only took bath in cold water, no matter what the season was. Now later, after Srila Prabhupada had his 2 heart attacks, and then he had his stroke in New York, then he used to have to start taking warm water baths. He would alternate between we would make the hot water for him and the cold water, and Prabhupada would make it according to what he needed. But at this time, he was only taking cold baths. And then from that time until 7 o'clock in the morning, Prabhupada would do kirtan and japa. He would do kirtan either with kartals or with mridanga. And then at 9 o'clock, Prabhupada would go out and do whatever errands he had to do, and he would come back before 12. And of course, all the other times, like from 7 to 9, and then let's say from 10 to 12, Prabhupada would be typing the whole time. And the mother of Shrikant and his little sister, she would always tell the children, be quiet. And they would call him Bengali Baba. Prabhupada's name was Bengali Baba. But Shrikant would call him Swamiji. He was a sannyasi then. So then Prabhupada would come back, take a little nap, then he would cook. And Shrikant would cut the vegetables, and Prabhupada would cook with his cooker. And Prabhupada would joke with him that I do all the work and you just eat. But Prabhupada wouldn't just cook for himself. He would make for the neighbors, for the little boy across the street, for the little children, and he would share his khichdi with everybody, and they loved it. Almost immediately, he began back to Godhead again, serializing book excerpts from his previous manuscripts, while at the same time beginning Srimad Bhagavatam. So by this time, Prabhupada had started Chaitanya Charitamrita, he had started Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and he had started Ishopanishad, along with Srimad Bhagavatam. So in his previous editions, 1944 up until 1958, Prabhupada was also writing topical articles and philosophical articles, like our Truth and Beauty and different things like that, and things things that people were reading in the newspapers, so Prabhupada would give his comments. But now, because he was so busy preparing Srimad Bhagavatam, he took excerpts from the books that he was translating and serialized them, like one mantra from Ishopanishad, and he would never finish it. On the bottom, he would always write, "To be continued in the next issue." So then the people would be inspired to get the next issue. When Krishna Pandit learned of his guest's lone struggles to produce back to Godhead, he volunteered to help with some of the business aspects of the publication. Bhaktivedanta Swami was indeed gratified by Krishna Pandit's sincere help, and in appreciation, he gave him an addition to his name, Hari Bhakt Anudas, one who serves the Lord's devotee. After 6 months in Chippiwada, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote an appreciation in the temple's guest book. So Shrikant, we don't understand how much Prabhupada struggled. Prabhupada would print his Back to Godhead magazine, but because he was staying in Old Delhi where people didn't read English, and it was in English, Shrikant says they couldn't even give them away. He would offer that you can have them for 1 paisa each, or you can have 100 copies to distribute yourself. But nobody was interested because no one there could read English. And still Prabhupada continued to print. And then, even when he printed his Srimad Bhagavatams, Prabhupada started out with 100 rupees each copy. And no one was interested. Then they reduced it to 51 rupees, 36 rupees, 21 rupees. Prabhupada would stand at the jalebi wallas and try to distribute his books, and no one was interested. But Prabhupada was having success here in Vrindavan selling the books, because here everyone was interested in the translations, and people knew English here. They were educated here, actually. And a lot of Gaudiya Vaishnavas were here. And giving to the institutions, like when Lal Bahadur Shastri, he had them put into the 50 institutions in Delhi. And the American Embassy, they got about 40 copies. So Prabhupada was having success on another scale, but not in the area where he was staying. So it was a little difficult for him. Now this is what Prabhupada wrote in the guest book after 6 months living there. I am pleased to write herein that I have come to Delhi from my headquarters, 1/859 Keshigat, Vrindavan, UP, purely on spiritual mission to propagate the cult of devotional service of the Lord. And I am more pleased to mention herewith that Shriman Sri Krishna Sharma, Hari Bhakt Anudas, has provided me a suitable room for my literary activities. I am publishing an English fortnightly magazine of the name Back to Godhead from this place, and the Nawal Prain Sabha, of which Sri Krishna Ji is the honorary secretary, is arranging for my daily lectures on Srimad Bhagavat. So Prabhupada, in the temple downstairs, in the evening time, he would sometimes perform the 7 o'clock arti, or Shrikant's mother would perform the arti. And then Prabhupada would also give classes. So there was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. We know that after Prabhupada had his stroke in America, he came back to India. And we heard that he used that 40 rupees that he took to America, he used that for the taxi to take to Chippiwada. And we hear that Kirtanananda came with him. A month later, another devotee came, and that was a disciple named Achyutananda. And Achyutananda, he met with Prabhupada. He came to the Radha Damodar temple, and soon after, Kirtananda became very sick because he was when he was a child, he had polio. So he walked with a limp, and he got injured, and he also had very bad dysentery. So he wanted to go back to America. And Achyutananda stayed. And Prabhupada, he went to stay in Chippewa at that time. So Achyutananda, he has memories of Prabhupada at Chippewa, it was all 1967. So it was very soon after Prabhupada lived here, because Prabhupada stayed here until 1965 in Chippewa. So he was talking about the scenes that he saw in Delhi. We'll discuss them later. What the neighborhood was like, and he was shocked at some of the things that he had seen. And then Prabhupada would go, he would get invited to the Gauri Shankar temple, which is a big temple there in Old Delhi. And one time they were going, and Achyutananda only had 2 dhotis. He was a brahmachari. And he saw cloth all folded up. And while they were walking to the Gauri Shankar temple, he said, Prabhupada, I need a dhoti, because Prabhupada didn't like the dhotis he had. So Prabhupada said, don't talk. And Achyutananda couldn't understand why Prabhupada was speaking like that. So then again he said, Prabhupada, I just wanted to ask you, because there's some cloth over there, could I get a dhoti? He said, don't talk. So then they went to the Gauri Shankar temple, and then they came out. Prabhupada gave a lecture in Hindi, and Achyutananda couldn't understand it. He asked Prabhupada, what he was saying, and then he asked Prabhupada, he said, Prabhupada, why did you tell me not to talk? He said, that was Adobe. And anytime you if you're going anywhere, if you see Adobe, it's inauspicious. So that's why I told you not to talk. So Achyutananda learned from Prabhupada all these different superstitions. Well, and he was explaining, it's not superstition, it's when you're living in a culture for hundreds of years, you learn what works and what doesn't work. Like Achyutananda also noticed that Thursday afternoon, nobody does anything. In Old Delhi, they would close their shops on Thursday afternoon because it's not even if you try to do something, it doesn't come out successfully. So, excuse me? Thursday, yes, Thursday afternoon. Yes. And then just nearby, Chippewa, he saw like 7 doors with houses behind, the doors going into houses. And there were these little girls sitting there, 8-year-old, 10-year-old girls, just in little shorts, no top, because they were little girls. And they were all sitting in front of the house, and in front of each door. One little girl, 7 houses. And Achyutananda couldn't understand, what is this? Why are these little girls sitting there? So he came back to Prabhupada, and he said, why are those little girls sitting there? Why aren't they in school? And he said, they're prostitutes. And Achyutananda was shocked. He said, they're just 10-year-old girls. He said, who lives in the houses? He said, their parents. And then Prabhupada shook his head. He said, yes, this is going on. So I remember when we would go to Old Delhi, there were these sections. You had to be very careful where you went because there were different sections like that. So Prabhupada understood everything. He was not living in a cloud. He saw everything around him, and he taught his disciples. He taught Achyutananda that he said, you have to read my books very, very carefully, because when I leave, people will say, Prabhupada said this, Prabhupada said that, and you will know from my books what I actually said. And when Achyutananda was here with Prabhupada at the Radha Damodar temple, because before they went to Chippewa, Achyutananda stayed here. So Prabhupada decided to give him the Gayatri mantra at that time. And Achyutananda has a wonderful sense of humor. So he said that the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is Krishna's 800 number. Anyone can call. But the Gayatri Mantra for the Guru, for Lord Chaitanya, and for Krishna, that's their private lines. So he saw everything in such a humorous light because he had to live here alone for many years in India. And Prabhupada had him live with the Gaudiya Math because there were no devotees here. From 1967 up until 1970, there were no devotees here at all. So he got his training in Gaudiya Math. But Prabhupada was very specific which Gaudiya Math he should stay in. And the other things, we'll hear other things, but yes, across from here is it used to be the Institute of Oriental Philosophy. That was Ban Maharaj's college. Now, Ban Maharaj and Prabhupada respected each other as godbrothers. They were all trying to fulfill the instructions of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So Ban Maharaj got this huge land where the Keshav Kunj is. That used to be Prabhupada Ban Maharaj's. The huge land where this heritage school is, that was all Ban Maharaj's. And actually there used to even be a church there. So Ban Maharaj, he wanted an institute for Oriental philosophy so he could give spiritual life to the students. And even Brahmananda, when he was in America before he met Prabhupada, he had read about this Institute of Oriental Philosophy and wanted to come here to Vrindavan to study. But then Ban Maharaj got caught because, how do you fund an entire institute? So there was a scheme at that time in UP province that whatever one collected for education, the state would double it. Whatever you got, they would give you that amount. So he had to go to rich people and collect money, and then the government would give him money in exchange. But in order to be part of that scheme, you had to turn the institute over to the government. So that's why now it's the Ban Maharaj Law College, Ban Maharaj College of Management, because ultimately what they did was they took the whole place over. And then the land was sold. They made Keshav Kunj, now Heritage School. But if you go in the back, I don't know if it's still there now, but at least when we came here with Prabhupada, there's a murti of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and his ideal was to teach spiritual culture, but it got completely turned around by the government after he disappeared. So he Achyutananda would go with Prabhupada to the IOP, Institute of Oriental Philosophy, and meet Ban Maharaj. Now later another disciple came, Rishikeshananda. So we heard, maybe we didn't hear yet, but we heard in the lectures at the time of the, when ISKCON was incorporated, and the trouble that the youth at that time were having because the Vietnam War was going on. And the devotees were getting forced to go into the army. So one devotee was forced into the army, and he had taken initiation from Prabhupada, but that didn't matter because it wasn't until we got incorporated that they were able to say that they were students of ISKCON and therefore they didn't have to be in the army. So he was put in the army. And the sergeant, he said, "You'll never make it in the army." So he took him to a hole in the wall of where they were in the barracks. He said, "You get out of here, you leave here and run away and don't come back." So the sergeant let him leave. And he came to India, and he came after Prabhupada had left. So Achyutananda was there with him. And Prabhupada gave them instructions. You must go to Sridhar Swami in Mayapur. Do not stay in Vrindavan, because you won't have good association there. So Achyutananda listened to him, listened to Prabhupada and went there to Sridhar Swami's. And Rishikeshananda got caught up by Ban Maharaj to do his collecting for him for the school. And Ban Maharaj would send him to Bombay, to Delhi, using him as a, his American disciple so that he would get money. And even to this day, in Nandagal, there's an inter-college. Maybe you've all seen it. It's on the road as you go to Vrindavan, a big boys' inter-college. That was built by Ban Maharaj with the money that Rishikeshananda collected for him. And when Rishikeshananda realized that he was just being used, he wanted to come back to Prabhupada. So then Ban Maharaj threatened him that I know if I turn you in because you ran away from the army and you ran away, so I'll get you put in jail, so you have to. So he captured him. So Ban Maharaj, he couldn't. Rishikeshananda ran back. He took shelter again of Prabhupada, and the devotees were able to send him back out of India so that he wouldn't get in trouble. So I'm telling these stories because very few devotees came with Prabhupada, and probably Chutananda was the only devotee who ever stayed in Chippiwada with Prabhupada. And his impressions, we'll read more later. Yes. Prabhupada spoke about the Radha Damodar temple. He said that in the courtyard where Rupa Goswami's Samadhi and Bhajan Kutir are the holiest place in the whole universe, because the 6 Goswamis would come there every day and discuss Srimad Bhagavatam and Krishna consciousness there. So these are the things that Achyutananda learned from Prabhupada that nobody else had heard of except for Achyutananda. Okay. In neat English script, Bhaktivedanta Swami went on to write that in his opinion, temples should be used solely for educating the public in spiritual values, and it was his personal mission to organize temples for that service. This is what Prabhupada wrote. Temples are not meant for ordinary householders engaged simply in the matters of animal propensities. Those who are actually engaged in the service of the Lord Deity, the predominator of the temple, can only be allowed to remain in the temple, otherwise not. And then Satsrup Maharaj explains that trying to compose Srimad Bhagavatam at Chippiwada while surrounded by sometimes noisy families with their non-devotional domestic habits had impressed upon him the importance of not using a temple as an apartment house. So Srila Prabhupada had that same trouble when we opened the temple here, because we had no accommodations for families here. Families weren't even allowed to live together here. Prabhupada would have the men and the women live separate. The men would live with the brahmacharis, and the women, we all had to live, all the women in one room together. But there were children, when... So the children would be in the guest house, and Prabhupada would get so annoyed by all the noise. So Prabhupada then got, in 1976, our Goshala, the Tapadia house. And Prabhupada said all the women and children and all the householders should move there, because he knew from his Chippiwada experience that families do not belong in the temple atmosphere because they're very noisy. The poor children, children have to play. And the children also in Chippiwada, they would play so much. And that's why Shrikant's mother would tell the children, no, don't disturb Swamiji, he's writing. So Prabhupada even wrote that in the guest book, that the temple should not be used as an apartment house. Despite his plans to settle down and begin the monumental task of translating Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami was ready to preach in other ways also. in October of 1959, he had encountered a news article in the Times of India. The clock? 6:50, okay. 2 American scientists had received the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering the antiproton. According to Prabhuji, gari hai aapke paas? Gari, clock. Khan, main nahi dekh sakti itne dur. Gari nahi hai aapke paas? Acha. Oh, thank you. I can't see it though. It doesn't stay. Okay. According to one of the fundamental assumptions in the new theory, the article read, there may exist another world or an anti-world built up of antimatter. The other world reminded Bhaktivedanta Swami of the eternal spiritual world described in Bhagavad Gita. He was well aware that the scientists were not speaking of antimaterial in the sense of eternal or spiritual, but he thought of using their scientific terms to capture the interest of scientific-minded people. He conceived of an essay presenting the theistic science of Bhagavad Gita in terms of the anti-material particle and the anti-material world. So this was the first book that Prabhupada wrote. We're still distributing it, Easy Journey to Other Planets. It was a time when the whole world was talking of space travel. Indian news media had reported the Russian Sputnik 2 years ago, and the race for space had begun. Seizing on the current interest in space travel, Bhaktivedanta Swami described how by bhakti yoga, the soul can travel past the farthest reaches of space to the eternal planets of the spiritual world, where life is blissful and full of knowledge. He gave his own fresh translations of Bhagavad Gita verses, couched in the language of the new physics, with its anti-material particle and anti-material world. The complete work, Easy Journey to Other Planets, was a 15,000-word manuscript, and he showed it to Heet Charan Sharma of Radha Press, but he didn't have enough money to get the little book printed. So he started putting it in his Back to Godhead magazines, to be continued, to be continued. In February of 1960, Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to print it himself in 2 installments of Back to Godhead. The articles drew an immediate response from a physicist at the Gujarat University in Ahmedabad, Mr. Y.K. Naik, who received Back to Godhead through the mail. Dr. Naik thought Bhaktivedanta Swami's application of the antimaterial principle was a really grand one. This is no doubt a classic essay. Dr. Naik was interested in further discussion on physics and transcendental knowledge, and Bhaktivedanta Swami replied with equal enthusiasm, finally asking the physicist to join him in distributing the cultural heritage of India to the whole world. We know that Srila Prabhupada had a disciple named Swarup Damodar, who later became Bhakti Swarup Damodar Swami. He was from Manipur, and he was a physicist. And because he was such an excellent student, he got a scholarship to University of Southern California, I believe. And he was studying there in California, and he met the devotees and met Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada encouraged him like anything to get his PhD in physics. And Swarup Damodar, when he was still a brahmachari, he brought his thesis to Prabhupada here in Vrindavan. when he got his PhD. Prabhupada was very proud of him because Prabhupada, also being a chemist, also being a scientist, and having Prabhupada, his mind was so brilliant, he appreciated that just as Dr. Naik, from this one little book, just a small book, 15,000 words, that's all, from this one book, it sparked an interest, because anyone who's a scientist, they always try to combine theism with science. And it's very difficult to do if one is an atheist, and most scientists are atheists because they think that everything comes from chemicals, even life comes from chemicals. So Prabhupada encouraged Bhakti Swarup Damodar to preach to the scientists, and he was very successful in his lifetime. He used to have so many science conferences all over the world, and many of the scientists came forward and assisted Srila Prabhupada and Bhakti Swarup Damodar because they actually believed in God. They believed that there was a soul. And now finally, by Prabhupada's brilliance, by using the same Bhagavad Gita slokas in scientific language, Prabhupada was able to prove the existence of the soul, the anti-material particle. Convinced that such an essay had great potential to interest educated English-speaking readers, Bhaktivedanta Swami worked hard to raise enough in donations to print Easy Journey to Other Planets as a paperback book. He finally did so in the fall of 1960. A foreword by Dr. N.K. Siddhanta, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Delhi, arrived late, but was included in the book as an insert. This is part of the insert. While everyone may gain from it, the student community in particular is recommended to read the book with care and practice bhakti yoga, which will help to strengthen the mind and build up character. I shall be glad to see this work read by the students and the teachers alike. That's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi. That's a very high position. So educated people could really appreciate what Srila Prabhupada was doing. Several Indian scientists and scholars contributed reviews, noting the book's scientific cum spiritual vision and the method of speeding over space, not by mechanical acceleration of speed, but through psychological effort and spiritual emancipation. That was a very interesting quotation that I hope I can find it. Yes. Rupa Goswami composed his books here in Radha Damodar Temple, describing the psychology of the soul and its progress from bondage to transcendental divine love. So Prabhupada was able to incorporate the scientific mind to apply it to spiritual knowledge. And this was the first time ever that this is being done. Now, of course, now we have internet, of course, radio waves. There's so many things that were never understood at this time. And Prabhupada was able to open up the spiritual knowledge for scientists who previously could not enter, they could not fuse the two. The spiritual science, Prabhupada would call nescience and noumenal, and in the Ishopanishad, that they have to be studied side by side. The material knowledge and the spiritual knowledge, if one wants to make progress. So here Prabhupada was able to do that in this book, Easy Journey to Other Planets. So I think now is 7 o'clock. We'll stop here, and we'll go on with Prabhupada's success with this Easy Journey to Other Planets and how he was able to attract many other intelligent people with his first little book. Hare Krishna.